What's really good, YouTube? I'm LUISGUSTO, and as the YouTuber currently most qualified to talk about this, today we're gonna discuss living in New York versus living in Chicago. Of course, y'all know I've lived more than half my life in Chicago, and the other half pretty much in Florida. As of last year, I made the decision that I gotta live in New York City at least half the year now to further my career.
New York, Chicago.
The decision to be out here in New York more than half the year is based on career opportunities. For 3+ years, I tried being an almost exclusive Chicago YouTuber, and it just didn't work out. And we tried everything: pizza videos, general food tours, general travel guides, neighborhood profiles, architecture lectures, history lessons, cheap eats. We even tried a daily vlog. But really, no matter what we did, we couldn't quite break through and get that growth that we wanted to see. Meanwhile, we saw channels that were younger and smaller than us here in New York City doing pretty much the same style of content, growing at 2, 3, 4 times the rate. So at the end of 2022, we basically got to a breaking point. It was either quit YouTube or try something different. And since I'm not a quitter, really the only 2 cities that made sense to further my YouTube career were Los Angeles and New York. And I got more love for the Big Apple than I do the Big Orange, or whatever they call it. Most of Gusto Nation was extremely supportive of that decision, and they really understood why we were doing it. But of course, there was that group of haters that had to, thumb down everything and, oh, I'm unsubscribing. And the most frequent criticism that we've gotten is, well, there's already so many YouTubers in New York. What makes you different is that you're in Chicago. Since when is that an argument to not try something? Would you tell a blue chip college baseball player, well, there's already so many players in the major leagues, you should be a professional lacrosse player? It's a good thing that some of these haters weren't around Second City when Tina Fey and Amy Poehler and Mike Myers and Stephen Colbert wanted to make the jump to New York. So maybe you're not a content creator like myself. There are a ton of job opportunities in New York City, whether you're talking finance, construction, engineering, law, technology, education. I can tell you that firsthand because I've got friends, family members that get jobs and make good money out here in the Big Apple. When it comes to career in Chicago, I have nothing but great things to say. After all, I came here in 2016 to jumpstart my career in tech, and in just a couple of short years, I was able to do that, working for big companies, writing software, and making big checks. I'm not the only one with a success story when it comes to launching a career here in Chicago. Narissa also came to the Windy City to launch what she was doing in her career, and she's been able to do that. And we're constantly meeting y'all in Gusto Nation who tell us that you came to Chicago for work, whether it be in tech, law, finance, academia, or even the restaurant and hospitality industry. It should come as no surprise. Not only does Chicago have one of the biggest economies in the country, it's also surrounded by the best universities in the country, like Michigan, Notre Dame, Wisconsin, Illinois. So there's a constant funnel of incredible talent coming to this city and really populating those jobs necessary for industry growth, no matter what industry you're talking about. Bringing it back to me, I was able to launch my career as a filmmaker and YouTuber in Chicago, and almost 4 years later, I can say that it's going quite well. But Chicago is not exactly the major leagues when it comes to media and YouTube, and that's why I had to go to New York to take that next step. It's very similar to why I came here from Florida in 2016. The tech industry in Florida is lagging way behind what's happening here in Chicago. So it's just logical to make those best steps, whatever career you happen to be in, because you want to make the right decisions for you so that you can grow in whatever you happen to be passionate about doing. New York and Chicago are number 1 and 2 in terms of public transportation in the United States. But with that said, Chicago is a very distant second. Not only does New York have more train lines, more bus routes, it also has more modes of public transit like ferries and even a tramway. Public transit in New York City is excellent. Yes, it does have its share of problems: reliability, safety, cleanliness. it can be expanded. You'd actually be surprised at some of the routes that are not here in New York City, specifically when you want to travel from borough to borough. But getting to Manhattan is relatively simple, even if you're in Staten Island, you know, because they got that big old ferry. I mean, that's what really the system was built on, to get people into Manhattan for jobs. Bringing it back to my job, you know, I need to get around the city to try different restaurants, attractions, parks, what have you. And I would say 99% of the time, I can use public transit to get from place to place. Really, the only time I'm using a rideshare in New York is when I need to get to or from the airport. Otherwise, we're hopping on the subway, a bus. We still haven't tried those ferries yet. Maybe if the pigeons were bigger, we could hop on one of those and fly across the river. You can live very comfortably in New York City without a car. Recently, Chicago was voted one of the best public transit cities in the world. And while yes, I do agree with that sentiment, I have to say that ever since the pandemic, things have definitely dipped. There have been ghost buses and trains, delays of 20 to 30 minutes in between rides, and overall just a much poorer ride experience. We're hoping that bounces back in the next year or two because Chicago truly does have magnificent public transit. We have the CTA, L train, 2 subways, and lots of buses to fill in the gaps where the trains don't go. There are even water taxis, even though they're not operated by the city. Now, technically speaking, the city could implement some kind of ferry system. Here's a little throw on the quarter into the fountain, making that wish. The CTA trains do have holes. There are significant pockets of the city completely not served by CTA L trains. There are also lines like the Green Line where multiple stations have been demolished. So where you could once get off and on, there's nothing there and you just ride right by. The prices stay the same. The ride experience, like I said, has dipped a little bit. I'm not gonna go into specifics because that's not what we're about on this channel. Just suffice to say, things do need to be cleaned up so everybody can enjoy that experience and we can have less people driving cars on the road. Now, when you compare Chicago to other American cities like Miami, Los Angeles, even Boston, the public transit is primo, but it's never gonna stack up with New York. The amount of coverage you get with the subways, with the buses, the ferries, and the tramway is just top notch and the best of what we can get in this country. But don't sleep on Chicago transit. Perhaps the most fierce rivalry between Chicago and New York City centers around food. People are always asking me, Louis, which pizza do you prefer, New York or Chicago? I just like pizza. Both cities have incredible food, whether you're talking fine dining, ethnic cuisine from all around the world, and iconic foods like pizza and hot dogs. Obviously, New York City has more restaurants, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's a better food city. Honestly, I think both cities bring it. When you are craving something specific, you could find it in Chicago and New York. We never have trouble finding places to eat when we highlight a neighborhood or we want to do a specific food theme. It's so easy because we have our methods of research, sometimes word of mouth, sometimes Google, sometimes, yeah, even TikTok. It's very rare when we're not satisfied with something we ate in both New York and Chicago. Now, the food cultures are slightly different. In New York, when you want to grab a slice of pizza, you can pretty much fall out of your room and grab a slice of pizza or a bagel. In Chicago, when you want a pizza, you pretty much have to get the entire pie. It's not really a thing in Chicago as much to grab food and take it to a park or just eat on the street. And obviously in New York, they have that. They've got the food trucks and food carts. Chicago does have food trucks, but it's so tightly regulated, I can't even explain it to y'all because I personally don't understand it. If you spend any significant amount of time in Chicago, you're gonna get spoiled with the food that is available here. As a matter of fact, on the very same day that we're filming this, we're also filming yet another iconic foods of Chicago video. There's so much to eat here, from the classic fast foods like hot dogs, beefs, and pizza, all the way to the upscale $500 a plate experiences. You can get food from pretty much anywhere in the world except maybe Antarctica, and the city as a whole really takes pride in the culinary experience. We've been fortunate enough to meet many restaurant owners, many chefs and servers who really help that experience for us personally. As people who film and review food for a living, it's nice to make those connections and form friendships with the people behind the food. And trust me when I say there are so many stories behind the restaurants, the foods, and the institutions all over the Windy City.
So there's no question about it. You can get some incredible food here. You can go low end, like $1 for a hot dog, all the way to a $500 steak. It's all up to you. Now, this is the one area where I think Chicago and New York are neck and neck. I can't call it. It's like you flip the coin and no matter what, it ends up on heads. When it comes to cuisine, I would say there are foods in Chicago that you just can't get in New York, and there are foods in New York that you just can't get in Chicago, or at least of the same quality. Yes, you can get a deep dish pizza in NYC. Is it gonna be the same? Probably not. Yes, you can get a bagel here in Chicago. Is it gonna be the same? Probably not. But overall, these are two of the powerhouses when it comes to food, and you could trust me, I've reviewed like thousands of food items on the channel.
Now everybody and their mama, their grandmama, and their baby mama knows that New York City is one of the most expensive cities in the universe. Needless to say, when we're living in New York, we're paying a lot more for day-to-day things, whether it be for the roof over our heads, the food that we put in our bellies, or even the attractions that we want to visit. You get a lot less for your money here. Apartments and homes are much smaller for a bigger price tag. And food can be more expensive too. Bagels for $6, a cup of coffee for $7. That's pretty common over here. Even a slice of pizza for like $4 or $5. There is a ton going on in New York City. Nobody on YouTube could really ever cover everything that happens in the Big Apple. I mean, that's why we're here, for, like I said, for the career opportunities, for all the potential that we can see making content and networking in this city. When we do make New York content, a frequent like hate comment we get is like, oh, well, everybody wants to be in New York City. That's not a bad thing. Demand and price go hand in hand. I didn't study economics, I'm no economist, but I understand the basics of supply and demand. As more people come into New York wanting food, wanting shelter, wanting accessories, the prices are gonna go up. But I gotta say, even though you are paying high prices for stuff in New York City, from what I found, you could find some of the best quality anywhere, whether it be clothing, whether it be housing and food. So yes, even though you're spending a lot more to be in New York, if you have a specific reason to be here, it's totally worth it. And come on, at the end of the day, do you really need a 7-bedroom suburban house so you could store your treadmill and your pool table and 5 weeks worth of Teddy Graham cereal?
When it comes to bang for your buck, Chicago is one of the greatest cities on the planet. You get everything you could want in a world-class city. Great housing, amazing architecture, so many things to do, cultural institutions, amazing food, great people, career growth opportunities, all for a fraction of the price that you would pay in New York, London, LA, Miami, or Paris. For the amount that we've paid for rent in apartments here, we probably could get something that's the size of a shoebox on the outskirts of Brooklyn. Expand that to anything else, utilities, food, clothing, it's all gonna be just a little bit less expensive here in Chicago. Now, of course, yeah, if you're gonna compare it to other American cities, the cost of living, the taxes, they are gonna be high, but against New York, it's a no-brainer. Chicago comes out on top when it comes to cost of living.
Before we talk more about living in New York versus living in Chicago, make sure you subscribe. Just like food, both New York and Chicago bring it when it comes to parks. The parks in New York City are plentiful. Obviously, there's Central Park, which is, I think, the second most filmed location on Earth. And you have a lot of themed parks like the one we're in right now, Domino Park. There are tiny parks in between houses. There are grand spaces like Prospect Park, legendary green spaces all over New York City, and they are a lot of fun. Maybe not as much in the winter when the wind is gusting and a lot of the leaves have fallen away, but they're still great spaces for community, for eating, even for first dates. I would say the thing that jumped out to Narissa and myself right away in spending more time in New York City is how much New Yorkers actually use the parks. Like I said, you can grab food like a bagel, a slice of pizza, and hop into the nearest park to enjoy it on a bench. Maybe you may have to share with the pigeons and the squirrels, but you still get to enjoy it. We also see a lot of different types of activity in the parks here. Skateboarding, musical performances, people selling their wares. I mean, I could really go on and on. I mean, we obviously film in the parks, so that's part of the activity, but it's not unprecedented. I see lots of YouTubers, Instagrammers, TikTokers, and MySpacers filming at parks all the time. Both on the channel and not filming, we've visited so many parks in New York so far, and pretty much always have a good time. I know Rowdy loves all the dog runs in New York. It feels like almost every major park in New York City has dog runs, and Rowdy is a big fan of those. Where we are in Chicago, there's no dog run that we can easily walk to, but here we've got a lot to choose from. Even in the wintertime, when the wind is gusting, it's really cold, and a lot of the leaves are missing off the trees, New York City parks are so much fun to be in. They're just a nice break from the hustle and grind of the urban environment. It's very similar to London, where they just fit so perfectly into the city plan.
We're obviously filming the Chicago part of this video in Millennium Park, and when it comes to green space, Chicago has a deep-rooted history. After all, the motto of the city is Urbs in Orto, which literally translates to city in a garden in Latin. Thank you very much. Chicago has some of the biggest, most historic parks in the country, from Jackson Park, where the 1893 World's Fair was held, which, by the way, we beat out New York for. You've got Grant Park, Lincoln Park, Humboldt, Douglas, Garfield, which was once named Central Park. And there's many parks that have a unique spin, like Millennium Park, Palmisano Park, which was made from a former rock quarry. And there's even Mid-North Park in Lincoln Park, which is a park within a neighborhood named after a park. You've got neighborhoods like Wicker Park that are named after the park. And you've got neighborhoods like Hyde Park that are named after a park in London. In Chicago, you come, of course, to Millennium Park, you're gonna see a lot of tourists, but then on the same similar day, you might go out to Humboldt Park and not see as many people. And that's one of the big frustrations for myself as a Chicagoan. We do have these beautiful parks, but we constantly have roads and parking lots cutting them up into a million pieces. The beautiful thing about Central Park in New York is that you can truly get away from it all. You can feel like you've escaped to nature without leaving Manhattan. And that is truly a beautiful feeling. I've experienced it for myself. The closest to that experience I found in Chicago is the wooded island in Jackson Park. Otherwise, you're always gonna be dealing with traffic noise, parking lots, and a lack of benches and basic utilities needed for an urban park. This is not to dog on Chicago parks by any stretch of the imagination. Like I said, I absolutely adore the parks. But what we could have as our own Central Park, whether it be Grant Park or Lincoln Park, has expressways, parking lots, just chopping it up into a bunch of pieces, making it unpleasant for the average citizen who just wants an escape into nature. And after all, that's what urban parks are made for.
So those were just 5 key points I wanted to talk about regarding living in New York versus living in Chicago. If you enjoyed it, make sure you finesse that like button. We'll talk more about this further down the road, and we'll talk about more of the differences between living in New York versus living in Chicago. For now, I'm out of here. Peace and blessings.